Hi, Brennan. Might be a very light meeting today.
Might be. We've got open source summit happening, so I think a bunch of people are busy with that. It's actually the first meeting I've taken this week because of that.
Wow, how's it going?
Going all right. Keeping very busy these days. How about you?
Not bad. I'm just waiting for my vacation in November.
I guess we can get started if no one else is going to show up. We are 6 after.
Sounds good.
I missed last week, so let's see. Anything important then, or just another quick one then?
No, we did discuss about, I think Toddy had done some work to document a bunch of registry behaviors. I know that he hasn't had time to do that because of a bunch of internal reviews. Nathan had something as well.
Introspection of the authenticate header.
Yes.
Was
Yeah,
that
I just
looking
looked a little bit of the actual specs and stuff around the challenge header.
the HTTP
Yeah,
specs?
yeah. I
Okay.
haven't. I've been mostly off since last week's meeting, so I don't have anything really new to add there.
I know we had chatted a few times about the V2 ping stuff, so I can at least do a short walkthrough of what I saw last time that I was kind of chatting about a little bit in our Slack chat here. Pardon me while I move a few windows here real quick. So something that I'd seen when I was looking through the Docker behavior, because I was spun up a registry, left it in logging mode, ran a Docker pull on it, and saw that it still is pinging the V2. And so I said, okay, it's still worth me double checking how this all happens. And as best I can tell, they've got an Auth API out there they're hitting. And in that, they go through and check and see which service we're talking to. They do a lookup to see what the host name is for that registry server. And they kick off to this login v2. And 1 second, move window. And then from there, that login v2, that defines and says, for a given host, let's make an endpoint string that is the v2 endpoint. So they got that in there. I think there's some other stuff in there as well. But from that, they do a call HTTP request to that endpoint. And they're looking to see if they get like a status OK. And if so, that's the happy path out of this function. So they are pinging that. I think I dug down a few more layers into there. Yeah, they're doing some token handlers, stuff like that. Somewhere in here, I also saw like the scopes is getting populated. I've tracked that one down to see if they're also manually generating the scopes themselves, if it's a push versus a pull, and what repo they're talking to. For the ping, I don't think that's as important, but when they're actually hitting individual repositories in there, they know that they're doing either a push or a pull, and they'll generate those manually. So I wanted to get this kind of at least somewhat documented, and this is not that documentation. It's just me throwing out some ideas or throwing out the implementation so that people see what I was looking at. I think it would be good for us to document what clients are doing today, not that we want to implement that as our spec, but that we want to make sure we don't break all these clients that are out there. So whatever we decide to implement for the working group, I'm hoping that if a client is still doing this, that they'll still somehow work with whatever we create. Does that mesh with whatever other people are thinking, or am I on the same track? So I feel like I'd seen a little bit of chatter from Docker in the channel saying, hey, this is not what we should be creating. This is an old way of doing it. We're going to a new way. And I feel like I still want to support it.
I think it's okay to call out similar to how we do that. The Docker manifest is a existing manifest format, but this is the way recommended forward. So
yeah. So I'll work on seeing maybe like a PR of some kind just to document some of this. More PRs for me to write, but somehow to capture this, because I feel like we need to capture what a bunch of clients are doing. So we could also do that for ORS, Regcuttle, Crane, all the different tools out there that are talking to registries, Scopio, pick a client, any client. It'll be good to get that from the client side, and it would also be good to get it from the server side to see what are all the servers doing out there as well, as best we can tell.
do you want to? No, I don't know. I don't want to say that. I was thinking of going down the conformance test route as a way to kind of get it started rather than kind of forces a bunch of conversations, right? But then do you want to merge it with the Uber conformance test? That was what I was thinking.
At some point, Auth is going to be part of conformance, where if you give us a login, we're going to make sure that your authentication matches how we expect authentication to work. It's in there today already.
Yeah.
But it's just not a spec.
And we don't validate like the header and things like that. We just assume it works, right?
I haven't dug in enough to how he implemented it. I wouldn't be surprised if he did the same V2 pings and generated some of the scripts manually, just replicating Docker.
And say, for example, we saw this in some cases, they don't return the service or the name of the registry and things like that. It's very inconsistent across different operators. So at least warn some targets that these are not kind of like conformant in some way or is different.
I'm on that same path. Hopefully we get this flags for people that implement it. But I also I'm trying to figure out the best way for us to move forward on our side of trying to tackle this, because it's also tackling the elephant. There's a lot of implementations of this out there already. And so how do we go through and chip through this and not dramatically break something by accident?
Yeah, the other challenge with authentication tests is that you need a credential across each one of these.
So if it's conformance, they'll give us the credential for the registry they're authenticating into as part of them running their test. We're not going to run the test against every registry.
Right. Okay, that's fair.
From, I think you're on my side when we're thinking about the end client, it is nice to test our client against a lot of registries.
Right. Jeez. Oh, well, fun time.
I do have little personal regression tests that I can't check in just because it's got credentials all over the place. I'm like, be nice if I could put something like this right in the code, but yeah, I don't want to give everybody my AWS login.
Okay. Hi, Mark. I think you're like, have you joined the call before? I just wanted to say hi.
Hey, no, it's actually my first time. I actually joined because I saw that the working group was formed a while ago, and I'm actually delivering the talk on the current specification at OSSEU this week, and I just wanted to check in and see what's going on with the working group.
So the talk you're giving, I'm assuming tomorrow, because they're almost done with the open source summit, right?
On Thursday.
Thursday, okay. So what part of the spec are you covering?
So it's about building a DIY private registry with custom authorization, and I have a library that basically implements the authorization service that the Docker v2 spec defines, and lets basically users build their own authorization service.
Okay. I think you're going to be a little bit peripheral to us, because you're going to be after they've already said, here's my login credential. You're probably looking at doing some kind of custom backend authentication with that credential, right?
Yeah. I mean, this is basically just an implementation for the spec describing the distribution project. They call it, I think, Docker Registry v2 Auth spec. Yeah.
So since you're taking it from distribution, receiving it from the client, and then working with it from there, I think you're going to be, like I say, peripheral to us, because what we're looking at is between the client and distribution, not between distribution and the auth server. There might be client to the auth server. There's going to be, if you're doing like a token authentication, and that will cover a little bit. But I think if you're worried about us specifying something that's going to break what you're doing, I suspect we're peripheral. We're right there next to what you're doing, but not quite.
Honestly, I'm not really worried, and I guess it's going to take some time until like an official OCI Auth spec would be adopted across the board by everyone. Honestly, I found myself, so I find quite a few holes in the spec itself, like it's not perfect. And I also found that providers like registries themselves don't implement it properly all the time. So I absolutely welcome the the existence of this working group, and I really hope that yeah, an official spec should improve the situation a lot.
Yeah, I feel like saying you've come across that too, huh? Because I think a bunch of us come across different registries having slightly different implementations.
Yeah.
Our main goal is going to be what the process is from the client saying, I want to try to push or pull this image to, and I've got this credential, to how do I communicate to the registry to say, hey, I'm going to this repo, and the registry saying you need to log in over here, and the client going and doing the login and coming back and saying, here, I've done the login. We're focused very much in that very narrow band. So things like credential helpers are out of scope for us because that's how the client gets the credential. And things outside of the client talking to the authentication server and saying, can you give me a token for this login? That's going to be back end behind the authentication server. So we're in that narrow band between those two pieces right there.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. But yeah, this is one of the big gaps within the spec that a lot of us have been seeing. So we're trying to fill this in as best we can, get some standardization in there. Yeah.
So the thing is, I actually quite like the token Auth specification. Like, I think the idea is good. It just haven't been formalized. Like, it just hasn't been formalized. So, and as I said, there are quite a few gaps in there. So those just need to be ironed out. And yeah.
As soon as everybody says it's just OIDC, what's so hard about it? The response almost always comes back, well, let's talk about cross-repository blob mounts. And they always like pause for a second, like, oh yeah. So there are a lot of those edge cases.
Yeah. And I would even say if anyone says OIDC is easy, they probably don't know OIDC very well. So
yeah. So welcome and good luck with the talk. I'll probably be watching from the live stream.
Thank you. So once I have the slides up there, I actually started to kind of rewrite the library a little bit, but I want to publish it on GitHub soon. So I will share it in the. Did you mention you have a Slack channel somewhere on the OCI Slack?
We've got an OCI Slack. If you are not in there already,
not yet,
and you have any trouble getting added to the Slack, feel free to ping me or someone else here that mentions they're in there. We can send invites out, and I think they might have fixed the invite URL, but I haven't checked lately. I know that it's been broken in the past.
Okay, let me try to join. Yeah, so I'll try to register and share the code in the slides, and yeah.
ccommunityempire.com. I think they've updated this, but I will drop this link in our chat. And if you have any trouble over there and there are problems with it, like I say, it's been broken in the past. We've got the main channels over in general that a lot of us chat with, but for this working group, we've got a WG-Auth channel in there as well.
Okay. I got the invite. So
and there aren't. It's a pretty lightweight Slack here. We won't flood you with too much in there. Cool. In terms of other stuff we want to try to knock out for this group, both today and in general, do we want to try to figure out a format for how we document this stuff? In terms of, I feel like in the past when we were doing the refers, we came up with the format for how we wanted to make proposals. In this case, we're trying to also capture existing both client and server side. Do we want to have some kind of format that people upload into there saying this isn't really a proposal, but this is just kind of like a use case or an implementation analysis, something like that, that we capture a couple of these things. I see the gears turn there, Sajay, but
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different desires, right? Like one is we want to probably have everything in one final doc, but iterating on one large doc is also equally challenging. So some
I don't
partitioning.
see these as part of our spec, though. I see these as like supporting materials for our spec. So what I'm thinking of
the
is
performance, it would go into spec, right, at some point.
once we have an idea of, okay, here are the 4 or 5 different implementations of the client, here is a handful of different implementations of the server. Here's our proposal for how we want to actually design a spec within OCI. We will compare that to all the different client server implementations and make sure we're not breaking anything. And so the spec itself would be separate from analyzing what's actually out there today.
That's fair.
So I'm thinking I can go through and do it. I've already been looking enough at what Moby's done in the past, so I can document some of that. I don't think it'll be too much trouble to pick on something like Crane and Scopio as well. I don't know if you want to take Oris yourself. I can easily do Reg client myself. So get a couple of these out there just to capture from the client side, and then hopefully do the same for a few of the servers out there as well. And what I'm thinking is just trying to capture the API workflow of this API is called and this API is called. Here's the business logic between the two.
You want to document how the client works.
Both the client and the server.
That's the matrix.
So I would do it as 2 separate analysis, because the server doesn't necessarily know which client is talking to. And so it's just going to have a general server workflow. Client's going to have a general client workflow. Some of them, if you try to make them together, you're going to find out they're not going to work. We've come across that before. So it's just capturing some of this. And I might be oversimplifying. I might get halfway into it and realize, oh man, I just started a whole can of worms here.
Yeah, no. I'm thinking what I was remembering was that issue 1025 that had a matrix of like pivots of registry versus features kind of a thing. I think it was Bracken or did that. That was very useful.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people kind of enjoyed that, but it's going to be hard to kind of like summarize the HTTP header has a service or not inside the authenticate field, or is V2 used or something like that. I think trying to being able to build that set of capabilities of the matrix might help. But is your idea to just document this first? Let's rough, and then we'll synthesize it later.
Yeah, that is my idea, is just to start capturing, throw it on paper, see what sticks. And we might come back later on and say, you know, we need this in different form, and then we'll reformat it and we figure out what information we need from that. But just to start capturing, here's what the clients are doing. And maybe if I spend some time, sit down and go through one of them and get it on paper and get as a PR sitting up there, that might help.
Yeah, that'll help others also.
Because like I say, my logic is to specifically go through, here's the workflow that I believe this client is doing. And so step through, it calls this API, then it does this, then it builds the scope with this field, then it calls this. If, you know, it's got a branch logic over here, whether or not it's basic versus token authentication, get some of that kind of captured, written down.
Yeah.
Because Reg client does the lazy auth. It just talks directly to the API. And if the server comes back and says, no, you need to do this, then it has some of its own logic over there. So I can also capture.
If you kind of like just put rough headings, that would also help people start. Otherwise, I think structure farming is the hardest one here. If we can fill in information the moment you kind of like put, okay, this is how authenticate, this is how you do push, this is how you do pull. minimum scopes defined, and then have a table or something, and then we can do that for Horaz. We can maybe do that for Crane also. So
I feel like the structure is going to come out of once we do 3 or 4 of these.
yeah.
Then we're going to realize the structure we needed to get put together. But yeah, I can at least start with this. This gives me
if you got
working
something
basis.
rough, please do feel free to share. Doesn't have to be like just TBDs all over the place will also help, but this is kind of the areas. I know that Nathan has some documentation that he's kind of like started working on, so maybe you can kind of like get it into the same format so that each one will read at least in a similar flow.
Yeah. It'll be nice to get the end into something like you're saying, some kind of matrix to say, here are the common features we're starting to see across multiple tools out there. This one does it this way, this one does it that way, and start putting checks and X's in different boxes.
That's going to take some time. Like you said, after we get enough data, maybe. Okay.
Yeah. So that's at least my action item. Anything else people want to get out of this meeting today? We had no agenda.
Yeah, I think we can. I'm probably going to drop off. But if there's anything, I don't think there's anything on the list at this point.
No agenda. So I'll at least document that we chat a little bit about Docker V2 and I gave myself an action item, which great. Good of me to do that to myself.
Okay. All right, folks.
Cool.
See you.
Mark, have a great rest of your conference there. I look forward to seeing the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.